everyone, and welcome to the Engineer.tf map review series version 2.0.5.3. Today, we are going over Swiftwater with our host today, Paintsier, and our guest, Grin, who is a invite engineer, I think, right, Grin? I don't remember.
Correct.
Yay, engineer, yay! So as a reminder for these types of things, Swiftwater is a somewhat bigger map than the other ones, so this review might be a bit longer than usual compared to our other map reviews. However, like the other ones, we are going to be going over general payload things. We're going to be over Swiftwater. Did I just say Swiftload? Swiftwater specific things for engineer only. So if you need to know things like push cart or place down telly when you push cart, then you need to watch another video, not this one. But anywho, Paintsier, take us away.
Yeah. All right, Grin. So much like I was stating, we're gonna essentially start here on offense. And just generally talk about first. You would be in agreement, right? There's really not going to be much gameplay actually on this point.
Yeah, not really. The only gameplay you'll see is if they decide to have classes sit in house. So that's something to look forward to. You can just see that before the game starts by looking through the windows and seeing who goes in there. But some teams will have a scout or soldier or just whatever sit in house to just sack cart for some reason. So when you get up to this ramp, that's usually when they'll come out. But other than that, that's the only type of gameplay you'll really see on this point. Other than just spy checking, which a bunch of places spy can be on this point. So that's very fun.
Yeah, there's a ton of props for spy to hide on. All these lamps, all these roofs, all these walls, all these rails.
Personally, I start Swiftwater offense on the Widowmaker because if you're sitting on the cart, you can just hold the mouse one down and fire as many shots as you want, and it's very fun. It's very funny when you catch a spy out with the Widowmaker, firing endlessly, but it'll work.
I mean, you mentioned house a little bit here. I know we won't spend too much time at this point on offense. Just don't. Are you, as NG, often coming over here to clear card, or are you often I don't know, putting a wrangle down here and kind of dealing with the sightline at all? What's your preference?
Usually, engineer would just stay on the cart. If there is a class that is spotted in house, or if your spy checks it and sees somebody in here, usually it's a soldier or a scout that can take care of it, because the soldier can just bomb in the house. And the scout is much faster. As an engineer, you're very slow, and even once you get up to this kind of area, you're going to want to assume that the sniper is still in tunnel, staring you down. So you don't really want to get off of, behind the cart. You just kind of want to crouch it and leave this up to other classes. So usually you just push cart and just kind of keep an eye out on the house. Just if anything does come out at you, you can just react.
Okay. I say let's start rolling on into second here. Just because second I know for a fact is quite the slog to get into. We just both kind of walked in here, but you're typically playing tunnels, right?
Yeah, you're 90% of the time you're going to be playing tunnel unless your team decides something different. I'll touch on that in a second. But your main job here is just going to be sniper protection, because sniper peeking through this, obviously main door or even through side tunnel is a very powerful poke against the enemy team. Because of that, he's going to have a lot of pressure on him from the spy or even the enemy flank. So there's a lot of corners in this tunnel where the spy can come from. So mainly just want to be watching your sniper and making sure he doesn't die to a spy. Other than that, you can coordinate as well. If your team's doing a push from upper, you can coordinate maybe throwing down a mini sentry either in main or side tunnel and wrangling the enemy gun until it dies, just to give you a little more room. And then once that happens, you have more free range to kind of walk out and either DM their flank or just continue pushing the cart. Other than that, unless that's happening, you're pretty much going to stay in tunnel, because there's nothing you can do if the gun's alive or if their flank is running out and about without any pressure from your combo. You're just going to be sticking in tunnel, pretty much fending off against the spy. What I meant by the other 10% is a lot of teams now will actually choose to do their main pushes through tunnel. And one thing that's very common is they'll still send one or two classes up to upper, and usually that's the heavy and NG. At least that's what my team does, just to have that two layers of pressure coming through. NG and heavy is pretty decent because heavy is pretty strong up in high ground, and if you get up here as an NG, you can throw down a mini sentry, and the high ground of that is also really good for this point. So that would be like the other 10% of the gameplay if your team decides that's what they want to do. But most of the time, you will be sequestered in tunnel.
Going back to the tunnel, just for a quick second here, because there's two ways that they can come in here, either side tunnel or main here. Are you often typically sitting here in the front door, typically, or are you dealing with side tunnel at all? Is that like up to your scout or something?
So pretty much you'll be kind of staying where you are kind of right now. You don't really want to peek like this sight line, so kind of this diagonal up against the pole is like what you wouldn't want to cross unless you have your whole flank with you, and your flank has decided we're going to do X. Now X can either be like, like let's say your combo's pushing and your flank's like, okay, we're gonna push too, and then you can walk through tunnel. Or maybe sometimes your combo might ask for like sniper pressure through side tunnel, and at that point you would want to rotate you and your sniper and your flank to side tunnel, but you wouldn't want to do that like alone, because obviously if it's just you coming over here, you get caught up by the soldier, you just die. So usually that's like a whole flank thing. But other than that, yeah, you would play really passive until your team decides, okay, this is what we're doing and we're going to do it now, and then you would do whatever it is.
Okay. Just to keep the ball rolling here, much like the card, let's start going into third point here, which I think actually, out of all the offenses, has a couple more options than what we've talked about so far. What's your preference typically on this point?
So a lot of the times it is up to your team to decide that for you.
That's true with most things with NG.
Yeah, so some teams will prefer engineers to go in the barn house or whatever you call it, the window area to like be an extra means of protecting your sniper. The other way that usually is what I get told to do on my teams is to just make sure the cart doesn't roll back, because there's a lot of teams will fall into a way of like, oh, the combo is in red room and the flank's in barn, and the cart just gets rolled all the way back to this point here, and by the time you do a successful push, it's like, oh my god, the cart is so far back, our push means nothing. So staying on the cart and making sure it kind of doesn't, roll back and just kind of stays around this general area is a viable strategy. As well as, if your combo does decide to do a push and exert pressure, you can also exert a lot of pressure by getting this cart very close, because the closer this cart is to cap, the more loose the enemy team has to play, and they can slip up very easily. As well as, allow your team to get in through more like advantageous areas because their team's playing looser. So I would say, honestly, I prefer playing just on the cart because of that. I think a lot of people neglect how cart pressure can be used to push a point, whereas if you were to do a push normally, that push might fail, but if you get really great cart time off of that, the push isn't a failure. It's just, has gotten you cart time. So that's what I would mostly prefer. But playing up with your sniper and protecting him is also a viable strategy if your sniper's like very good.
Just to touch on the what you were calling barn over here. Some people might call it boiler.
Yeah.
Depending on teams. Do you have any preference of like where they're playing here? Are you usually up here at all or down here?
Very interesting question. It depends where your sniper is. Pretty much,
of course.
Wherever your sniper is, you kind of want to be his back. The only time that I would kind of not follow that is if, like, let's say you're playing your sniper more right side, and there's soldier bombs on the left porch here. You probably want to meet the soldier so that you're kind of like a closer wall to him against your sniper. But other than that, you're just pretty much following your sniper wherever he goes and just being like his back, essentially.
Turn into the Razorback.
With a shotgun.
Oh, yeah.
And a mini sentry.
Upgrade a Razorback. Alright. So is your mentality of essentially just applying pressure during your team's pushes apply also here to fourth as well, or what's your strategy?
So, fourth is a little weird. It depends on how active your team is, because there are a lot of teams that are very active on fourth and are always kind of walking forward even if they don't have Uber. There are a lot of teams that also just kind of wait at the corner until they have Uber. and then push. So I'd say if your team is very active in always kind of being aggressive at this fence, I would say you could probably play more so outside and on the cart and getting that cart to the other side of the rocks. Because once the cart gets to the other side of the rocks, you have a lot more space to play with and also have access to this health pack back here if you need it. If your team is playing slower and they're kind of stuck in main, usually what you'd want to do is you would want to come into this house here and just protect your sniper, because this house is a very good angle for your sniper. There's a lot of different angles your sniper can have, and is just a very good idea to come in here and protect him. Once your team does start applying pressure as well, you can just kind of walk out into this area and either throw down a mini sentry just anywhere on the grass, or you can stay in here and just wrangle a mini. It's probably less effective just because of the sheer size of this point, but walking out here and just throwing down a mini sentry just kind of anywhere on this grass is really good, because if a scout or just anything decides to come out here and fight you, obviously the mini sentry covers so much ground in this area that it's a big help. You also have a lot of cover to play with. There's this big tree. You can kind of hop on these rocks as well and mess with the splash. If you're fighting a soldier, you can take high ground, just fight there. So it kind of depends on what your team is doing. Pretty much just comes down to is you can only be as aggressive as your team. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, I guess the big point on Swiftwater, at least for offense engine, is last, because we get to play with the big gun, don't we?
Yeah, so usually what I do for last right away is I will just sack the cart and just get as far as I can and die, so that I can spawn unleveled guns. And then you're pretty much just going to be playing out here most of the time. I would say keeping your gun in a more passive position until your team pressures is smart. So just anywhere kind of that is not immediately able to be shot at by the enemy team. And then once your team does decide to do a push, you could drop it down here, be more aggressive. And the whole point of that is you want to have cart pressure while the gun is able to see the cart. And then as the cart gets closer, obviously their team is going to drop down on the cart. And that's when the Wrangler comes in, and you just wrangle them all down. It's a very strong strategy. It is usually what most teams will use as their main strategy of pushing this point, instead of kind of doing an uber push. Sometimes they'll just try a 9-man cart or just push cart along just to get the enemy team to drop on it so that they sack to the gun. So that's mostly what you'll be doing. Obviously, with this caveat comes with the fact that you're going to be on level 3 guns, which means you're probably going to get a lot more pressure, i.e. the spy, or even some teams will, let's say if your team fails a push, the other team might just decide to just all come out and aggress you so that the gun dies. So you just have to watch out for that. Obviously, you don't want to necessarily die, because if you die, your gun dies, and you wasted a whole 30 seconds plus building a leveled gun. So you definitely want to play careful and just kind of go with the flow of the game. But that is something to watch out for as well. Level 3 teleporters are also very powerful on this point because, obviously defense takes longer to spawn than offense. And if you have a level 3 teleporter, it doesn't really matter how many people on your team dies if they can just flood through the telly over and over and over again. Especially if you're in a scenario where the cart is very close and your team can just spawn up through the telly and just go down main and just continue fighting. It puts a lot of pressure on the enemy team. And is very important.
One thing I want to talk about, because I do also want to talk about mini options as well on this point. Do you have a specific spot that you would like to actually place your gun? I've heard occasions of making sure it lines up with these pillars or right before it. Do you have any ideas of that?
There is a spot. I think the spot where you have it right now is good. You could probably get away with going a little higher, but obviously you don't want to put the gun so that it can be seen by the upper area. You can position the gun so that it only sees the lower area and can't be shot by the top area. So where you have it right now is great. As long as it can kind of see the lower area, it's fine. In terms of mini placements, it's less egregious. If you are going to be running minis on this point, I'd say one of your main goals of using mini sentry is when your team does an uber push, you probably want to throw the mini down and wrangle the enemy team's gun, just to get that killed faster, and then you would, be on the cart, pushing the cart. So at that point, your mini doesn't really matter in terms of positioning, as long as it can see the enemy's gun and can take that out. And then obviously, enemy sentry anywhere down here is just going to cover this. area anyway, so it's fine.
Yeah, and not to take away from the level guns here, because that is just by far way more powerful than just any other mini sentry.
Yeah, it's definitely like the apex like strategy for engineer on this point. You really don't have much pressure as an NG on this point, other than like pushing the cart, but that's kind of for the whole of payload offense anyways. But the level gun really lends a lot to you in terms of like what you can do.
So is there anything else you wanted to talk about offense at all before we head over into the deep dive of defense?
Probably nothing like particular for offense reporter that I can think of.
All right, we can get back to anything if you think about it, but I want to start talking about defense here because boy, we got a lot to talk about here. First off, I know we don't typically mention teleporter placements all that often on these reviews, but um, it would be a hindrance to not talk about a teleporter option for defense here.
The funny last teleporter spot. So pretty much all of these doors will open to you at any point in the game. So when you start on defense, you can put a teleporter entrance in just any of these doors on the opposite side of the map, and the spy cannot sap it. Well, unless he travels the whole map, but he's not going to do that. You'll just have to tell your team which door, obviously, like where you put it, and it is pretty much an unsappable like teleporter unless he saps the exit, which is kind of death for a spy on this map.
Do you have a preference? Most people choose
Not
just
really.
door
Yeah. This is the quicker one, so that's probably the fast one. So usually on rollout, I'll put this down and immediately heat my reset bind so that I spawn closer to the door, just to get that extra second of setup time.
Yeah, because you're kind of on a time crunch here.
Kind of, yeah. It depends.
So speaking of time crunch, during this rollout, there's so many different variants I think you can do on this rollout. Again, all depending on what your team wants. But I think it's best just to talk about a couple different ones.
So this one's probably less team dependent and more so like what you prefer as a player. So you can either set up just directly on second right away.
What is your preference?
I usually do prefer to set up in tunnel. For the sole reason of it is usually common strategy for teams to want to sack into tunnel to kill your medic or force your medic, and I have seen it happen quite often. So usually level 1 gun here, or level 3 gun, sorry. It was level 1 in my thing, so brain moment. Level 3 gun here, at least at the start of the game, is just to deter the fact that if they do bomb into tunnel and actually get into tunnel, the level gun will just kill them. You don't actually want your gun to be peeking any sightlines like this. You don't want your gun to be seen from here. You kind of want to put it more passive, like up against this wall, just for the sole fact of if anybody does get in tunnel from the offensive team, it kills them and protects your medic. That is usually what I prefer to do. Although it is more rare nowadays that somebody from the offensive team will actually get into tunnel. But it is just one of those preventative measures that I prefer taking. And I will usually set up, instead of the tele entrance at spawn on rollout, I will do a backwards tele where I'll have an entrance in this corner leading up to the tower there, the attic.
Yeah, I was about to ask.
Get out quicker.
I was about to ask, do you actually like these backwards teles?
I mean, I have played against spies who will run you down if you do not have a backwards tele and try to run this out. Especially if you're on like Rescue Ranger, obviously, you're going to be marked for death. So it's very dangerous. And if you, in theory, if you die on second, but you don't lose the point, you can always place the tele entrance when you spawn. And for second, teleporter is not as important. Just because usually second it's kind of a one and done point. Either an offensive push will either just win the point or fail the point. It's very rare that there'll be some middle ground fighting. So teleporter is not really that useful because if someone dies, it's most likely going to be a flank player and they don't really need the teleporter to attic for that. So it's not as important in that scenario.
So I guess to continue on the offensive holds, we're on second because this is oftentimes the other common spots that you'll see just building directly on second.
Yeah, so second is a very powerful point. I'd say it's probably the second most powerful point on the whole map. second to last. But especially for Engineer 2, you do have a lot of power here, with very kind of little weakness. So there's two kind of main gun spots you're going to want to be using. The first one is the more common one. Just anywhere on this platform, really. I'm sure there's more specific placement, but I don't usually use this spot. But this platform is pretty centralized. It's far away from Attic, so even if the enemy team does use an Uber through, like, Attic, they do have a ways to go to get to your gun. It sees, obviously, tunnel here, so if anybody tries to shoot you, you can just retaliate. It sees a little bit into side tunnel, not much, but you can always utilize rockets to kind of splash damage anybody if you know that they're there. The second spot, which is the spot that I usually use, is the spot right here, kind of closer to Attic. There's a few reasons for this. First one is the spot over here puts you further away from your combo, which means you are more easily be able to be killed by a spy. The spot is closer. It makes the spy's job a lot harder to kill you. Usually a spy will just resort to enforcing your gun at this point, which is a problem in and of its own, but you can deal with that much more easier than him stabbing you. One other boon of this spot is, I don't know if you can get away with it on this spot, but the health pack that's in tunnel there, if you rocket this corner, it can hit people on that pack. So if they're waiting for it to respawn, let's say they're 30 HP and you rocket bang them, they just die. And that happens more often than you would think, I'm not gonna lie, so that's really funny. And this spot also offers much more visibility into side tunnel, which is very good if you're getting spammed from side tunnel, or if a sniper is there, you can have much greater means of fighting them off than the middle spot. The one negative of this spot is obviously the fact that it is much closer to this window than the other spot. So if a team Ubers through here, they don't have to go as far. And even one thing that's very difficult to deal with, if not impossible, is if they flash a heavy in this window, your gun's probably not going to live. I'd say the only way to kind of fend that off is you have to have your team communicate to you when they walk through this door on the shutter here. If they don't do that, and they, the team walks through and Ubers, if your gun's not wrangled, just for whatever reason, it will just die. So if you do use this spot, you will just have to communicate to your team, hey, I need to know when their team walks through this shutter, or else, my gun is not gonna live. So at that point, if your team does communicate it, you can be ready with the Wrangler and just kind of, shoot this window. Even if they're Ubered, I would kind of shoot this window, just because it does apply, slight pressure. And if they have multiple classes in, the fight, the Uber fight, can, damage whoever's not Ubered as well. If the gun does die here, and you live, you can always fall back and, replace the sentry down, in this middle platform if you have enough metal. Or you can drop down here and, place a sentry down kind of on this lower area. This is a very common fallback spot. Yeah, just anywhere down here is a very common fallback spot. It does see a decent bit, as well as has a lot of cover around it with these metal sheets, and right above the bridge has technically cover as well. So that's a decent fallback spot. Obviously your goal on defense is kind of you never want to die, so having those fallback options is very important instead of just oh, I have to keep my gun alive in a scenario where it's just not going to stay alive. So recognizing when to fall back is important.
Honestly, this spot is actually really good for a fallback spot, because it surprisingly denies card quite a bit.
It does. They have to pretty much sit exactly behind the cart in order to dodge it, and that's...
They just can go dumb.
Yeah, that's a really bad position in and of its own.
One thing coming out of the fall spot, let's say you actually manage to fight them off, do you typically leave it down there, or do you haul it up or rescue ranger it up? Or what's your preference typically?
Yeah, I mean, you'd want to come back up here. If your team can regain positioning, you would want to just default back to what you're doing before. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And just for chatting about it, because if you look at any old videos, this was also another common sentry spot over here above side tunnel. This doesn't get used at all, does it?
No, you only get away with this spot if you're on K&D. That's about the only time I've seen that spot used in the last like 2 years is like
Yeah.
going against K&D and they're just owning us. So they just like we're gonna use the funny goofy spot. But no, yeah, that spot is very bad. Has a lot of the same problems of like you're away from your team and also like you're on the whole other side of the map. If you want to like fall back to third, you really can't do that. So
Yeah. I just wanted to mention it because that was very common for older demos you might see.
yeah.
Speaking of third here, we kind of skipped backing out into second, but you essentially go into that hole that we were talking about for either rolling out there directly or just staying on second. On third, I guess there's kind of two big spots. Maybe third if you want to count speakers, but do you have a preference?
I'm not
typically
gonna
here?
count speakers. Speakers is god awful.
That's fair. I would agree.
I remember when I was in Steel and I thought speakers was like the best spot.
Well,
my god.
let's talk about it here. Do you have a reason why? What's the reason why you don't like this? Because you'll see this spot all the time.
It's very safe to be shot at from the boiler area. The sniper or soldier can stand in the very back corner or in the window and just shoot it for free. And there's about nothing you can do about it, because usually the thought process back then was like, oh, you just have your flank go into boiler, but that's not really that common anymore. Soldier will usually stay kind of outside on like the outer windows and just kind of contest the sniper if he's there. So yeah, it is not a good spot. Very horrible.
Yep. No, and I would agree too. But so talking about real spots here, what's your preference? Do you typically prefer on top of the shelf or down below?
So the best spot is usually on top, just because like high ground, and also like this spot where I've have it placed sees into red room, so you can kind of shoot things in red room that are either like trying to beat like pre Uber or like even like in a post Uber. If their Uber just is horrible and their Uber ends in red room, you can get some nice cleanup damage or even just kills to help your team out there. It sees most of the tracks on third here, if not like all of the tracks, so it's pretty decent. If they sit behind the cart, you can always just rocket the floor to kind of do damage to them that way. It does see into window, so if there's like a sniper up there, you can send rockets up there, although you'd probably not want to peek the window necessarily. You'd probably want to stand behind this sheet. And also, it's just a pretty decent spot because you're just right next to spawn. Like, if you wanted to leave, you're just out to spawn in 2 seconds. So it's not that far out of the way. Have dispenser right where you have it placed as well, and then you're just right next to the metal here. You just have to like be wary, like if their sniper's called in main, to not like main pick up metal. Okay, so the second gun spot that is kind of it's very situational, and not a lot of people necessarily use it. But if the cart gets very close, one thing a lot of teams will do is they will just start sending all of their players through boiler here and just try and come at the cart this way, just because it's a closer way from boiler to the point. One thing you can do is kind of like a surprise tactic. Is you can put a gun kind of in this area. One thing this gun is able to do that the other gun doesn't do is it sees like behind this like set of like pipe. One thing like some offensive players will do is they might like hide behind these pipes just to like I don't know stall for like their life or whatever. So this gun helps against that, and also like I said, if their team is going to start coming through boiler, it does kind of act as like as something that they have to shoot before they can get to the cart as well. The other gun is decent at that as well, but this is a second option, just like I said, kind of as a surprise tactic, as like, oh, if they're gonna do this, you put the gun here, and then they all flood down and they all die to the gun. They didn't know it was there. That's one thing that I've been seeing a little bit more use. I think Spamfest did not last season, but 2 seasons ago, it was very strong, and a lot of different engineers used it as well.
It's also very safe to get out to fourth with it too.
It is also very safe to get out to last or fourth. Sorry, yeah, because you can just hold S and leave, and this door is not open until they cap third. So there's literally no way the enemy can get to you except from front, other than a spy, obviously. So it's safe for that as well. Which is honestly probably why it is like as decent of a spot as it is. Probably less so for the fact that it can do damage, but the fact that it's like a surprise factor spot that is very safe because you can just walk out. So that's something you can do as well if the cart is very close and you're up against a team that will start going boiler because the cart is close. Other than that, I will only really build a lower gun if my team has died very horribly on second, and their team is very slow to come into third. But if I know, like, for example, like, okay, they're going to be coming in very quick, I'll throw a gun down just kind of anywhere in this main area, but, like, I'll just throw it down just so if they want to come at our spawn, either through main or, like, whatever other means, it's just something else they have to get at before they can just start owning our team and spawn camping. Other than that, I wouldn't really utilize lower guns all that much. I know one thing that is very niche, but a lot of engineer players praise is running minis on this point and kind of DMing, I guess. I'm not really one to do that, so I don't know how it would necessarily look, but I have heard, minis on third and fourth be such a good strategy, and I wouldn't know how to go over that, but I have heard it. So if you're curious and want to try it out in some scrims or whatever, I mean, go for it, I guess.
In general, because we actually did talk about that last season, but in general, it was just the concept of just kind of similar to what this gun was, just placing it out in the open and just essentially being like another scout. It's more effective on fourth than it really is on third, just because
Agreed.
this is a smaller point. The level gun is much stronger.
I'd say it's less so that it's smaller and more so that it's so enclosed. Like,
It's
where are you
very,
gonna?
it's
Yeah,
very
you can't
enclosed.
go fight anywhere. You can't walk in Red Room. You can't walk in Boiler. You can't like run down their main. Like, the only place you can walk is just on the point, and that doesn't really get you anywhere. So yeah, I'd say on fourth it's more viable, but on this point, not so much.
Yeah, the awkward thing is just with minis is if you do have to go back to a level gun, you have to then go back to spawn. Times where you just don't have it. So that's like the big downside with it.
Yeah.
So you just don't want to build down here at all? Because I know there's some teams that want to do just go straight to their bunker hold.
Yeah, I mean, some teams will do that. I'm not personally a big fan of that, just because, like, from a positioning standpoint, like, your combo being up here just makes more sense. If your combo stays down here, you kind of give up a lot of space at the point, and it's very easy for you to be locked off, because there's only, like, 3 areas for you to kind of contest here, and if their demo's, like, set sticks on the floor, you just kind of can't walk out. So, from the team standpoint, I don't like bunker, and from an engineer standpoint, also don't like bunker because you don't really see as much. Because, like I said, with the gun up here, you do see a lot. You can see into Red Room, you can see into windows, see all of the tracks. It's very good.
I think so. Talk about fourth here. Let's assume we're on level guns here because I think that's what the majority of people probably end up.
Yeah. So fourth is very simple. In terms of leveled guns, kind of just want to place it in this area, just for the sole fact of fourth is a very big point, and there's no good place to really put a leveled gun that would not be in a sightline. So the main reason that this gun exists is for when their combo uses an Uber into your team, it is just a get off me type thing. It is not meant to really watch the cart in this scenario. That'll go to your team. So this is kind of the only position that you can really use for a gun. I think that's why leveled guns are very popular. Or not leveled guns, sorry. Mini sentries are popular on this point, because it allows you to play more flexible, just on the point as a whole. But if you were to use leveled guns, which I would probably prefer, for reasons I'll go over in a bit, than the mini sentries. If you were to use mini sentries, like I said, you're allowed to play a lot more flexible. What I usually see most engineers do, and by most engineers I mean Snoozy June, is they will play around these rocks and throw a dispenser down here and be very aggressive with their flank. And sometimes the combo too will get very aggressive past this fence and kind of play around these rocks. They'll have a mini sentry just kind of anywhere in this grass area and just kind of hang up on these rocks and just kind of DM anything that wants to walk forward. I assume as well, like, if you're being very aggressive, you can just kind of hop this and go right into the house, like I just did, and just DM house if you wanted to do that as well. Or you can just have your spy open the door and just DM their flank or sniper, whoever it is. But yeah, you're really able to play a lot more flexible in terms of, like, your single-handed, like, power as an engineer in this point. The main reason why I would use level 3s instead of mini sentries personally is usually on defense as an engineer, you don't really want to die at all. So the leveled gun, while more passive and not as strong, allows you the safety of being able to back up and leave to last point whenever you want on the flip of a dime. If you are playing more aggressive with many sentries, you obviously open yourself up to die a lot more, which would be kind of detrimental because obviously you have to wait for that respawn timer. And if let's say you die and your team wipes and their team decides, okay, well we're gonna just roll the cart, and while we're rolling the cart, our combo is gonna take last and just start spawn camping you. And it is very easy to spawn camps before last, so that is very common to happen. You would just obviously you'll be spawning up on a respawn timer. You'll have no way to put a leveled gun down to stop that. That's why I would personally prefer to use level 3s, is just for the fact that I can leave 4th whenever I want and immediately start building a leveled gun up on last. Just for the sake of, being ready as soon as possible for when the other team's going to push in.
Which is very important for last.
Very important. Like I said, I think it's probably the strongest point on the map.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also last too. They're going to kind of be harder.
Yeah.
I guess speaking of last, let's just head over there because there's a few things to talk about. Where's your preference for a gun here? Because there's kind of 2 big spots, I think.
So there's 2 big spots, I'd say. I assume probably what you're talking about is the upper spot and the lip spot. I don't know which upper spot you prefer, because I prefer kind of more so somewhere around here for an upper spot instead of the ledge. Reason being is this sightline is just kind of nasty and is absolutely free to shoot your gun. This still has a somewhat sightline, but it's less so and does still see most of the tracks. So that's kind of how I would position my gun, but it's just a quirk type thing. It's not that important. And the other gun spot being just kind of, I assume just anywhere on this lip area. You could I see this is common, just closer to the wall. This is also kind of common. Just kind of anywhere kind of on this right side lip is decent, just because it overlooks the tracks immediately. So if anything tries to push the cart, they just get melted. I like to play this point very silly. And what I mean by that is I will randomize where I put my gun. Reason being is kind of like how I was saying with 4th, is there's a lot of places to shoot at your gun on this point. So this upper area, like I said, has this really big sight line. There's this window that can, pretty much shoot this entire point just as is. They can go into this window as well and have a large sight line. So I will usually change up where I put my sentries just for sake of randomness. It doesn't matter where you really put your gun, either on the upper area or here or here or here, because it all sees tracks and it all watches the same area, which is just the surrounding area. So I will usually, it's very common for me that if I have a gun up here and it dies, I'll just drop down here and I'll just put a gun here instead, just for the sake of just switching things up. Sometimes it's very common oh well, if you're on offense, it's oh well, the gun is always in this spot, so we don't really have to think about how we're gonna come at it. But if the gun's at a different spot, it creates that moment of oh, okay, well the gun's here instead. And, I'd say it's not
shock.
Yeah, it's shock. I wouldn't say it's more of a surprise factor, but it's more like a oh, the gun's here now type thing. So that's how I kind of like to play last in terms of leveled gun placements. And like I said, it's just because most of the spots are very similar in terms of what they watch, so it doesn't necessarily really matter where exactly you have it. If you do use the upper area, you have to obviously be careful of the fact that Spy's very easily able to kill you up here just because you're so separated from your team. You can do the dispenser in the door, but they can crouch jump over the dispenser in the door, so it's not that good. One thing you can do to kind of help against Spy in a way is you can stand on this thing, which makes it so that you can't be backstabbed, but obviously you are vulnerable in other ways, i.e. a sniper, and the Spy could always just come up here and revolver you. But at least if you're up here, you won't get backstabbed. So yeah, you just have to be careful if you're up here with a gun for the Spy.
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to mention about this spot is making sure your sentry is a bit far away from this, because if it's anywhere close to this end, the Spy can come up here and sap it. It's great.
So the spy could do that, but like your combo is going to be playing most
would be,
likely
but-
in this area. So if he were to do that, he's just gonna die. Like
He would, but like
your team is just gonna kill him.
there's no reason to even give that option.
I mean, I guess if I was a spy, I would not do that. I would just do
Nope.
like up the stairs because I'd rather, you know,
Rather
if you
be
come up
safe.
the stairs, you only really have to fight the NG right away. Where if you decloak anywhere down here, you're kind of risking fighting against like 5 people plus at once. So I'd take my chances with the NG at that point and just decloak up the stairs rather than that. So I would say you do not have to worry about the spy doing that to your gun.
No, but it's a minor thing.
I suppose. I literally have never thought about it until now when you've brought it up, but
It happened once in a match for me,
I see.
and I was like, "Why?"
Yeah, I would also be like, why? Team, where are you?
Speaking of things that I've had people yell at me about, what is your opinion on this dispenser over here by the lamp? It's very common to see some heavy sit up here.
Yeah. That's very common.
Okay.
I would say this is probably a more so common spot, at least at higher levels, because you can sit on that light, but the thing is, it's like, if their team's pressuring upper, you can very easily be, like, killed here, either just by, like, a headshot or, like, just by pressure. So I'd say the dispenser here is not as important. This is a more safe, like, position, I'd say, just, like, up against where you have it right here. Just because this is kind of more so where your team's going to be playing anyways, like, pretty much behind this sheet, not peeking the sightline. So I'd say this is probably a better dispenser spot. One thing that is very common too is frontier justice on this point is pretty decent.
It's surprising.
Just in terms of like, if your gun goes down, they're going to be pressuring the cart. You're probably not going to have time to walk back to spawn and swap to anything like a gunslinger or anything like that. So the frontier justice just allows you to, like, obviously if you get any kills and your gun dies, you can just utilize the crits to either stop cart or whatever else. Like, if their team is not necessarily pressuring cart, but, you know, maybe, like, it's a post-uber and their demo's, like dilly-dallying, you can just kill them. There's nothing really else you're going to be expending shotgun shells on this point anyways, other than a spy, and 3 shots should be enough in terms of killing a spy. If you have to use more than, like, 3 shots to kill a spy, you're probably going to lose the fight anyways, unless you're both just horribly bad. So, Frontier Justice is probably just, like, the best slot for this point.
Yeah, I would agree. And you surprisingly get a good number of assists, too, in, like, a post-uber, so...
Yeah.
Fairly easy to get crits.
Yeah, it's definitely very easy, especially with, you know, there'll be a lot of weak classes trying to, like push the cart while there's nothing happening, and sometimes they play very dumb and you can get a kill, or like if your spy goes for a stab on like a sniper and you've dealt damage to him, you know, that's an assist. So yeah.
Yeah, your gun will get like 17 kills on the spy by the time an Uber push comes in. Just from tapping the cart.
Yeah.
So is there anything about I guess the map overall that you wanted to talk about that we didn't cover? Any special, unique, weird things, or any big pictures?
I'd say Swiftwater is kind of generalized. I mean, in terms of like a payload map, you just kind of have to play it like how you would any payload. Well, other than Vigil. Vigil's kind of more quick, but as long as you kind of, like I said, just play it as a payload defense map. Well, payload defense, but like payload in general. Defense is more important than offense. Or what I say? What am I saying? Defense is more important than offense in terms of like engineered gameplay.
Yeah.
So as long as you play safe and just, you know, like I said, you don't really want to die ever. So as long as you can stay alive and keep guns up, you're fine. There's not really anything you can do in terms of like specialization or anything like that, because if you like don't have a gun watching the cart, or if you're not watching the cart, it kind of opens your team up to a lot of pressure that will devastate you.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, just staying alive. Make sure you don't die to stupid things. Much like everything, no matter what side you're on, the card is what your baby.
Pretty much.
So, anything else that we need to discuss when it comes to Swiftwater? I can't think of anything off the top of my head that's important, or things that are specifically just engineer in general. Um,
No,
anything
yeah, I
you wanna-
mean, we went over like pretty much what's like meta, even like the minis on fourth and stuff like that. Like that's yeah, I think we went over everything. Like I think everybody has their like engineer like trade secrets that like they do from like player to player, and I definitely have my trade secrets, but I'm not giving them up. I'm keeping them secret. There's only two people that have the engineer, the Grin's engineer vault, and it's me and Poseidon, and I will not give up my secrets.
Don't worry, I'll get it someday.
No, there's no way. I asked you. Listen, I asked you if you needed a mentor. You said no, so you ain't
What?
getting none.
When was this?
When I was on the Katrina team. Anyways, it's
Anyway.
off
Anyways,
topic.
on that note, thank you for joining us, everyone, for the Engineer.tf map review of Swiftwater Final. I'll be joining us for next week for the map, which is probably a Koth map, which I don't remember.
I'll be product next week.
Product week. So that should be a fun review. So yes, be sure to join us next week. And thank you and goodbye.